Hey, what's up guys? Today I wanted to make a video showing you my single target DPS build using a one staff. And so I think it was last week I made a video showing my gear and all my builds. And so one of the questions that popped off a few times is my rotation about my DPS build. And so that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. And I'm gonna remove the camera and I'll show you my build, and then I'll show you my rotation that I use with this build, okay? Alright, so first of all, my current CP is just a little bit over 3k5, just to give you an idea. And so those are my stats. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but just to show you real quick. And then the build that I'm using for single target DPS. Again, this is for single target DPS, okay? And so it is not really for healing. It is mostly to kill some sort of boss, secret dungeons, Gates of Infinity, world boss, or maybe the last boss of a dungeon. And so this is where this build is really shining. And so all of those kills are all optimized for single target DPS. And so if I go real quick through the abilities, I'm using Focused Bomb with the mobility, I'm using Inferno with the reduced cooldown and consecutive use, and I'm also using Chain Lightning, and here I'm only using the first specialization of Chain Lightning, and basically what it does is that it does an AoE at the feet of the target, and so it's a small AoE, but it is still able to do some damage to single targets. And so it's a bit expensive, but I think it's still good. And then I use Fireball Barrage. I use in a piece here, but it might not be exactly needed. I'm using Judgment Lightning with consecutive use. I'm not using the damage transfer. I'm using High Focus, obviously with damage boost. And on the wand, I'm mostly optimizing again for single targets, and so Touch of Despair. I'm using Effect Duration, Curse Explosion. I'm using everything. And then Decaying Touch, I'm using some single target and more damage. And I'm also using Time for Punishment, the effect duration. And then finally I'm using Swift Healing, and this is basically the only support that I have on this build. So far, the way I use it is that it's mostly a no shit button, and so if I need some emergency where I need to heal myself, then this is the button that I'm going to use. But most of the time, I try to rely as much as possible on Vampiric Contract for everything related to healing, because the cool thing about Vampiric Contract is that it heals you depending on the damage that you do. And so, you know, if you do a lot of damage, then you're going to do a lot of healing. Okay, so that's the point with Vampiric Contract. And so, I mean, if you feel really confident that you can heal yourself with Vampiric Contract, and maybe you have some healers in your group, maybe you can even change Swift Healing for another damaging ability. And so maybe you could go, for example, with Ice Spear Bombardment with the Ice Spear, and maybe you could go with a little bit of AoE with Infernal Meteor. I don't know, I'm just giving ideas here, but the way I see it is that Swift Healing is kind of the only support, and you use it when you actually need to, when you're about to die or something. And here I'm also using Chaotic Shield, which is the block from the wand. And I kind of like this because when you do a perfect block, you can basically get the free heal. The heal doesn't use any mana, so that's pretty cool. But again, if you want to go completely full damage, you could also go with the Mystic Shield. And so when you do a perfect block, you're going to do a little bit of damage instead of a heal. And usually most of my builds, I'm always using Chaotic Shield. I don't know, it's just higher in level as well, so I don't know, it just depends on what you want to do. So I don't know, Mystic Shield might be able to do more damage in the end. And for the passives, I'm using Devotion and Emptiness. And Noble Revival, I'm using the skill heal, the Noble Revival for skill heal, but you know, like, it's kind of one of these things that's it's the only thing that is left, if that makes sense. There's not much going on except this one. And then I'm using Vampiric Contract, I'm using Wraith Beacon, I'm using obviously Forbidden Sanctuary, this is really good, and Flame Condensation, and Mana Ball Eruption, and Asceticism. asceticism, yeah, exactly. And so the only thing that you could maybe do here with Noble Revival is that since you're not, this no, Noble Revival is only relevant if you're using Swift Healing and maybe Chaotic Shield. So other than that, if you're not using Swift Healing, maybe you could go with, I don't know, Mana Hamp, because you get more health and more mana, so that could be pretty cool. You could go with Full of Corruption, but I tend to avoid it in single target fights because, you know, it's just basically useless if if there's one target and nothing really dies. So yeah, I just go with Noble Revival here, more healing with Swift Healing, so that's pretty cool. So that's pretty much it for the build, and as for the rotation, what I usually do is that I always start with Focused Firebomb, and there are many reasons why you want to start with Focused Firebomb. The first thing is that it allows you to pre-cast at the very beginning of the fight. And so if, for example, you know that your tank is about to pull, well, just before he starts pulling, since this is a cast, this is a huge cast, Firebomb is a huge cast, so you can pre-cast a little bit before your tank starts pulling, and so that way you can start DPSing right out the gate, right? And so another thing that is really cool with the precast is that, for example, in a secret dungeon in the Gate of Infinity, the timer only starts when your first ability starts hits the target. And so if you're able to pre-cast Firebomb, well, the cast here is kind of it's not counted within the timer, and so you're that way you're basically gaining a few seconds on your timer. And so always starts with that for this reason. Another reason why you want to start with Firebomb is that it applies a bunch of burning stacks. And so because it applies a bunch of burning stacks, it then becomes more valuable to use Inferno Wave, which basically applies more burning and has more chances to you know, it has more effects since it has burning. And also with Fireball Barrage, it is pretty cool because, again, this skill, Fireball Barrage, it does more damage depending on the stacks, the burning stacks on the target. And so that's why I think Firebomb is probably the way to go. You pre-cast it just before the fight, and so it applies a bunch of burnings, and so you save some times, you put some burning, so this is really good. And then the second thing that I do is that I always do high focus, and the reason I want to do that is because right now I have all of my cooldowns available, and so this is a good way to start a fight because all of your abilities will basically have a reduced cooldown, and on top of that, high focus will also be faster on cooldown, and so it's just the right way to do it. You just start with a massive damage, and that's the way I do it. And then I put time for punishment right away because it puts skill damage resistance on the target. And so since all my abilities are available right now, so I put time for punishment because I'm going to do a lot of damage to the ability, to the target, I mean. And then the third thing that I do is that I start putting my dots. And so dots are damage over time, and so they're more valuable when you put them on your target right away. And so I start putting a stack of Touch of Despair, and so you can put 3 stacks, and so you put 1 right away so that it's easier to go about it later on. And then also put Decaying Touch because it's also a dot. And then from here, once I put my dots, I usually go for the biggest abilities, the biggest cooldowns, and so I might go for Judgment Lightning, I might go for Fireball Barrage, I might go for Inferno Wave, and then I just use whatever is off cooldown. So that's kind of the way I do it. So it would kind of look like this. So I would start with Fireball, High Focus, Time for Punishment, put my dots, and then I might go for the big damage. And then I just use whatever happens to be on cooldown. So now this is available, those are available. I just use whatever is on cooldown. Time for punishment again. So that looks like this. And so with this rotation, there are usually two things that I struggle with. And so the first thing is that when I'm out of mana, then I'm out of mana, right? And so you have to cast in your piece to get a bunch of mana, but you have to be careful here because, you know, like when you're casting in your piece, sometimes the boss or maybe some sort of ability might knock you down, or they might stun you, or they might break the inner piece. And yes, you can use this thing called immune to CC here, but the way I see it is that immune to CC, it works, but it also breaks the mana generation, and so it's kind of not so good. So the way you wanted to do it is that when you're out of mana, you kind of have to time your inner piece perfectly so that you don't have to break it. Like, you want to make sure that the inner piece works perfectly so that you're able to gain your mana, and so you don't want to break it. You don't want to the boss or something to get to interrupt it. And so that's the first struggle here, because if you're not able to get some mana, then you might have to resort with the mana regen potion or something, and if you don't have any mana, then it's really difficult to do any damage. So you want to make sure that inner piece, you're able to cast it properly so that you're able to get some mana. And then the second struggle that I have is everything related to the burning stacks. And so sometimes it takes me a while for me to recast a fire bomb, and sometimes Inferno Wave doesn't apply any burning, and so sometimes I simply lose my burning stacks. And so it's not a huge deal, but because of it, I'm losing a little bit of DPS, obviously, because first of all, I'm losing the dot on the target, and so I'm losing the damage over time. And also, since I'm losing the burning stacks, then I'm also losing DPS on the Fireball Barrage, and so that's something to keep in mind. And so the only way to really make sure that you're actually applying burning stacks is to make sure that you cast fire bombs from time to time. And yes, sometimes Inferno Wave can also apply some burnings, but it's not entirely 100%. And so sometimes, for example, I might cast some inner piece here, because this is a huge cast. This is like 6 or 7 second cast, and while I'm casting inner piece, well, sometimes I'm losing my burning stacks because they're expiring, right? And so now to get back to gain a few stacks again, I have to make sure to cast fire bombs again. And so it's just a little thing. It's not the end of the world, but I know that I'm losing DPS because of it. And so that's pretty much it for my rotation. You also want to make sure that you have your damage bonus and the right foods. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope that this video was helpful to you, and see you in the next one. Peace.